Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Megan and Brooke, and thank you, Lady on the Moon. Let's thank them one more time. Great music. Thank you. It is a distinct privilege to welcome each of you to Seaver College in the beginning of this new year. Whether you are a freshman with us for the first time or returning to us from having studied abroad or perhaps an interesting internship somewhere in this world, or if you're simply preparing for your sophomore year, your junior, or your senior campaign, we welcome you, and most importantly, we welcome you home. You belong here, and the theme of belonging is something we hope to develop over the next several weeks. Convocation, each week at this time, is a unique Pepperdine tradition which I hope you will participate in fully. Good things happen here each week. You will meet your friends here each week. We will build community together here each week. For the past several years, I've had the privilege of using this occasion to offer some thoughts about the beginning of the school year, to tell a story or two, to highlight some university successes or perhaps some things on the horizon that excited me. But today, I'd like to use our time to experience a very important moment in the history of this nation. August 28, 1963 was an important date in American history. 50 years is more than 2 lifetimes for most of you, but for some of it was only yesterday. I have with me today a copy of a program for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It was held in our nation's capital and ended at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Many of you are familiar with that beautiful place. News reports from that time indicate that it was a seasonable late summer day in Washington, D.C. It was clear, with temperatures in the low 80s, not unpleasant at all, but the heat in America over issues related to race and equality was boiling over. The program for the culminating event for the March on Washington shows 18 discrete segments with prayers and music, tributes and remarks. Listed at number 16, toward the end, one finds the president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I've read that he struggled with his planned remarks, especially the ending, and who wouldn't if the expected audience was 250,000. He wanted to say something that would inspire, that would last, and that might even change history. As he began his prepared remarks mid-afternoon on this day, 50 years ago, he followed his notes carefully and perhaps predictably according to his careful preparation. It was a good speech. It was well framed, and it was very well delivered. In the audience was a dear friend, gospel singer Miss Mahalia Jackson. And toward the end of Dr. King's remarks, she shouted, "Tell them about the dream, Martin. Tell them about the dream." And so he did, moving from prepared text smoothly to one of the most inspirational and moving extemporary orations in recorded history. His speech was not merely given to 250,000 people, but more than tens of millions have heard this speech over time. It is powerful. The speech is remarkable. It has stood the test of time, and it calls to us today. I've asked my colleague, Dr. Ira Jolivet, professor of religion at Seaver College, to read the very words intoned by Dr. King on this day, just 50 years ago.
I want to thank Dr. Benton for giving me this great honor to read this great historic speech. And I invite you, as you listen to this speech, to listen on 2 levels. There is the level that speaks to the societal situation in 1963, and you'll hear that. But there's also a deeper level in here, and that has to do with something that is universal and eternal, and that is the virtue of justice. So if you would, listen to the I Have a Dream speech. I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree is a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still badly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright days of justice emerge. And that is something that I must say to my people who stand on the worn threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to distrust all white people, for many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. They have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their adulthood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating, "For whites only." We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crowded, crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. When we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we'll be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, great God Almighty, we are free at last.
Thank you, Dr. Jolivet. To my student colleagues, knowing history and embracing that which has gone before is truly crucial to making your own contribution to strengthening this nation and the world that you will someday inherit. Dr. King was right, as Dr. Jolivet read. 1963 wasn't the ending point. It was a point of continuum. It's a challenge that we continue, the challenge that articulated in that wonderful address continue to this day. I'm confident that you, each in your own way, can help strengthen the world and along the way strengthen Pepperdine too. Let's do that. Let's commit to doing that together. And let's begin anew on this historic day. Finally, the recorded music played as you entered chapel today was performed by Miss Mahalia Jackson, the woman whose voice, it is said, inspired Dr. King to share his dream as he did. And so as we adjourn in just a moment, we're going to play one more of her songs. And it happens to be the very song that she sang before Dr. King offered his famous speech. Thanks for your presence today. May God bless you in the year that's ahead of us. We stand adjourned.